Hello, welcome everybody. I'm Mario Bernardi, and hello, welcome. Good to see you. Lots of familiar faces, some new faces. I hope you're doing well. I can see Muriel, I see Bogna, I can see Mike and Martha, I can see Joanna and a few more. I can't see all of you, but thank you very much for coming. So today I'm just going to pose the music. This was this beautiful overture by the Russian composer Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov. And I know Russian artists are not at the top of everybody's heart at the moment, but I just wanted to play this music, first of all, because it's a wonderful piece of music. And second, because there was a thing during the World War II in London, in the National Gallery, while during the Blitz, while the Germans were, bombing London, there was a pianist. She organized concerts of mostly, if not exclusively, German music. That was the response of the artist to the war. So I think it was also our hearts and our feelings are with those which are now in the middle of a war in between Ukraine and Russia. So just I don't want to, of course, I'll never talk about politics, but I think it's important to have talks with people who are not spending very nice Easter. Okay, and because Easter is also about this in the end. Buona Pasqua, Buona Pasqua. So in this talk, I have prepared a series of masterpieces, a series of artworks, and I wanted to give an idea of how different artists, different times, both in art and a little bit in music, they've tried to not just illustrate, but to create something that was a way to make make their idea, their interpretation of the Easter story, and we're all familiar with even if you don't have to be Christian really to understand and appreciate the religious art, but especially the Easter story is very, very famous. And I would like to start tonight virtual experience talking about a contest between two artists, and also to explain the rivalry that always had created these beautiful masterpieces. When we think about the artist, we always think at some sort of divine inspiration that is infused in these geniuses, and they create these masterpieces. But very often, they were also pursuing fame and success and appreciation and the approval of their patrons, and of course, social and economic success. So not very different that many other people pursuing different type of careers. And I think this is a very good example between two of the greatest artists of their time. This is the Transfiguration by Raphael. Transfiguration was about a month before the week of the Passion. The disciples had this vision of Jesus Christ appearing in the sky. Was a kind of a sort of anticipation of what was going to be the resurrection. And he appeared in the sky with this light in the back glowing between the prophets Moses and Elijah, and this was important because, of course, especially in the Christian gospel, there's this constant way to find connection with the Bible, with the prophecies, with the life of the prophets, to show that what was happening was actually something that was written down in the Old Testament. And in the lower part of the painting, this is a painting by Raphael. It's actually the last painting by Raphael. Raphael died soon after completing this one. For many years, as the art historians believed that this was not finished by Raphael, but just by his pupil, but actually this was finished at the time of Raphael. They have done some more recent studies about that. The lower part of the painting, this is a very big painting. It's about 3 meters tall, it's over 10 feet tall, so it's really a big painting. There's a group of the disciples performing an exorcism. So there's a boy here possessed by the devil. And so this connection between the resurrection of Christ and the prophets and the guy possessed by the levy is like the fact that we are, as humans, always immersed in sin and temptation, but with the resurrection of Christ, this, of course, been washed away, and we have a new start. And this is possible to get liberated from sin and possession thanks to the resurrection. So there is a very complex theological message in this very beautiful theatrical way. And this is one of the most beautiful paintings by Raphael, and it was commissioned in around between 1517 1518 by the Cardinal Giulio de' Medici, who was the nephew of Lorenzo Magnifico. He was Giuliano's son. So Giuliano de' Medici was Lorenzo Magnifico's brother, the one who got assassinated in Florence during the Pazzi conspiracy. And the Cardinal Giulio basically later on became Pope with the name of Clement VII. At that time, he was the Bishop of Narbonne in southern France, and he ordered 2 large paintings for one of the chapels of this cathedral. And the other painting is this one with the resurrection of Lazarus, which is the painting that has the number of catalog NG1 in the National Gallery. This is the very first painting that was acquired by the National Gallery. The National Gallery in London was created with the first group of about 20 paintings, and amongst them, this was considered the most important. And it's a true masterpiece of the Higher Renaissance. It was commissioned by the same cardinal to a different artist, the artist Sebastiano del Piombo, who at that time was working in the Vatican, as well as Raphael. Raphael was doing the rooms of Raphael, while Sebastiano was a Venetian painter, was working in a more administrative job. He was responsible for the lead seals of the Pope, so was more kind of a cleric job. But as well, he worked as an advisor for several popes. And he was a very close friend of Michelangelo. In fact, the drawings for these painting and the subject was actually provided for. Number of sketches, a number of drawings were provided to him by Michelangelo. So there are several cases in which Sebastiano made paintings, but were actually paintings that were the ideas, the composition was actually created by Michelangelo. So they are painted by a different painter, but they are as if they were Michelangelo. So we have 2 great geniuses that didn't go along very well. And they have this task to create the most beautiful painting for one of the most important cardinals of that time. And they are so eager to show that they are the best artists at that time that none of them wanted to finish the painting before the other one. So they didn't want to show it before the other, because they know that the world was watching this. And in fact, it ended up that they didn't gave it on time. So the painting stayed in Rome and eventually took different ways. This one ended up in France and then in England, while the other one, the Transfiguration here, was left in Rome. Actually, the Transfiguration was used as the image in the room where there was the body of Raphael during his funeral. Basically, Raphael died in 1520, the 6th of April, 1520, which was a Good Friday, so right at the beginning of the Passion Week. And it's very interesting that there was this painting there. And we know that the historian and painter Giorgio Vasari, who wrote a biography of of most of the artists from the 1200s till the 1500s, he described this fact that people were moved by this painting, and while mourning Raphael, there was the body of Raphael in the center of the room, and then this painting right at the back, so celebrating is art. And the Resurrection of Lazarus by Sebastiano actually has a number of elements. Like here, of course, the Resurrection of Lazarus is a kind of, again, a way of saying that the resurrection is something that is possible, is real, and will happen for those who believe. And that's the whole point of this painting and story as well. The man resurrecting, Lazarus, is got this bits of shroud here and is naked, and you can see that the position, the posture is very similar to the one of the guys hanging in the ceiling of a Sistine Chapel. There's a number of similarities. It looks like one of those figures there, and there are a number of other elements that really connect this painting very much with the idea of the Sistine Chapel. For example, the hand of Christ is very similar to the hands of the ceiling of the chapel. It's so incredible that there's similar elements to that. So this was really something interesting to see. I believe in the beginning of 1500, that's where the greatest artists, at that time were, and seeing this competition, I think is something very exciting to be there. But where and how, when did it start the representation of the Passion, and how did it start? Was it always the way we used to see the crucifixion and the Last Supper? Were all these scenes always represented this way? Well, no, they kind of evolved, and the narrative behind them changed many times. So this is a sarcophagus dating back to the 4th century. This was discovered in Rome on the Via Ardeatina, which is nearby the Appian Way, where many catacombs are. And this was discovered in the catacombs of Domitilla, and is now in the Vatican museums. It has stories of the Passion. There's a man carrying a cross on the left, a cross which is a thin symbolic cross. It's not a realistic cross where you can hang someone. And then you have the coronation of thorns. But in this case, the crown is like a jewel crown. It's not a crown of thorns or a tool of torment. And then in the center, there is a cross again, but again, it's only symbolic. There is the he and the rho. The rho is the P here, and then the X is the he, which are the first two letters of the word Christos, which means Christ. And then we have on the right, Christ presented to Pontius Pilate. Here this Christ. Christ is beardless, as he was in the early Christian representations from the 3rd, 4th century AD until the 6th, 7th century AD, when they started to represent Christ bearded. And here we have Pontius Pilate washing his hands, literally in this case, but also in an allegorical way. If you look at the center, there's this very interesting element. There's one Roman soldier that was watching the the cross and the birds, which represent an annunciation, a news arriving, and it's a new age. It's the dawn of a new age. The other one is sleeping, and the sleeping soldier, or the sleeping person in this religious scenes is very important, because it represents the fact that during the most important episodes or things that happen in history, there's always people who are aware of what's happening in the world, and they can actually live those historical events. But there are also people who are not aware of what's going on in the world, and they are the ones sleeping. And so a great part of the Christian message is about being awake, being aware of what's happening in the world, being aware. And I think it's besides the religious aspect, it's a good advice anyway. And we see there is no crucifixion here, but there is a symbol of a cross. Although the cross only became a symbol of Christianity at the second time in the early centuries, especially in the 2nd, 3rd century until the end of the 4th century, beginning of the 5th. crucifixion was not really used, the cross wasn't really used much as a symbol, it was more other symbols like the fish. And this is because the crucifixion was the death penalty for the slaves, so it was humiliating and was quite brutal. It was only when the crucifixion was abolished at the end of the 4th century that then became increasingly a symbol of Christianity. This is one of the oldest representation of crucifixion, and it's a door, this is a panel of a wooden door of the church of Santa Sabina on the Aventine Hill in Rome. I'll just show you. First of all, I'm going to show you where the Aventine Hill is. Let's go to Roma with Google. There it is. And then right here in the center, right on the, not far from the Circus Maximus, there is the Church of Santa Sabina. It's this complex here overlooking the city and the Tiber. It's got a beautiful garden overlooking Rome. And this is the church that was built between 422 and 432 AD. So in the beginning of the 5th century. So it's very well preserved. There's always also a convent. It's a beautiful part of Rome, and the church is wonderfully preserved. Now, if we go inside the basilica, this is the entrance. It is a porch that has frescoes and fragments of inscriptions and tombstones. There is the wooden door, which is the original one from the 5th century, and it's amazing that it's been preserved since then. And here we have one of these panels has a representation of a crucifixion. Although you can't really see the cross, you could see the position, you could see the two other figures smaller proportionally, because of course Christ is the most important figure, so it's almost double than the other two. It's a very simple representation, but it's one of the very early images of a crucifixion that we have. To basically find other old representation of crucifixion, we have to go to the Roman Forum. In the Roman Forum, and I'm going to show you Google Earth now, right by the center of the Forum, there was a church, one of the early churches built around there, which is called Santa Maria Antigua. Now, this church was buried entirely after an earthquake that in the 9th century covered it for about 1,000 years. So the church it's here is this complex here. I'm going to show you now if this works. Yes, it's here. There's also another praying room called Oratorio dei 40 Martiri with frescoes as well. And because of a landslide, this was completely covered. So in fact, the Church of St. Mary was built somewhere else. And this was just abandoned until the 19th century. When it was rediscovered, they found that there were hundreds of square feet of frescoes very well preserved. Now, this has been closed for many, many years and only reopened to the public some 10 or 12 years ago. So it's, if you go to the forum again, if it's open, pay a visit because it's very, very interesting. Now, I have just selected one of these frescoes, which is one of the early images of the crucifixion. These are frescoes in the 6th or 7th century AD, so one of the earliest representation of the crucifixion, in which Christ has this very elegant outfit. It's not naked, it's not as usually it is, because this idea that he's offering himself to us is like a new Adam somehow, is the rebirth of humanity. That's why there's this representation of the nudity of Christ on the cross. And in this case, no, it's got a very nice outfit, like royal. And then there are other figures: the Virgin Mary, Longinus, which was the Roman soldier that converted to Christianity, and then we have Saint John, because that's one of the, of course, the evangelist with a very accurate account of the Passion. And of course, the story of the Passion is represented, you know, either the whole story or just single aspect, like the crucifixion of the Last Supper, for you know, as a standalone scenes. But especially in the Middle Ages and later on, so around the 12th, 13th century, later on, complete series of the Passion became increasingly popular. One of the most popular and most influential works was made by the German artist Albrecht Dürer, Alberto Duro in Italian. He traveled across Italy extensively, and Dürer was quite different than most artists of his time, because he didn't really like the idea that an artist should prove himself worthy than making nice paintings and then waiting for someone who, giving him a job and getting him some commission to create some beautiful arts, and so being able to make a living. He invested a lot in etchings and drawings and this series of prints, because he understood that if a print was successful, it could sell many, many copies, and then potentially his artworks could have a better value, and then it didn't cost him very much to make them. So it was an easy thing to do, and then it potentially had a much higher reach. So it's probably the first artist that understood the potential of mass production of art and the serial production. And of course, this happened in Germany, not short after the invention of print, Gutenberg print. Now, this drawings this prints are very, very complex. There's a number of details, which is a thing that I think people really appreciated at that time. On the left, there's the Christ falling while ascending the Calvary, and on the right, there's the praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, and or Gethsemane, you pronounce it, and you could see that there's a number of little details. It's really hard also to tell apart sometimes the details. They're very, very rich and very, very complex, and this really had a big influence on the art of the second half of the 16th century. Now, before we start seeing the story, here's the story from the at least from the Last Supper. The actual Easter story will start basically with the entrance of Jesus Christ in Jerusalem on the Sunday before the Easter Sunday, which is celebrated in Catholic countries. It's called the Palm Sunday, where these palm branches are used to reenact the welcoming of Christ in the city. And then according to the traditional chronology, the Thursday there is the Last Supper and the washing of the feet, and then Christ is arrested. But according to some more recent work by scholars, that probably took a little longer, because of course in the gospel it doesn't say what happened. We just know that certain things happened at night, like the capture of Christ, and that after the morning of the third day after being crucified, Christ resurrected. So that's the only information we have. We don't have any other days or any other reference. And before we go further with the paintings, I just want to play the beginning of Bach Passion, which is a 2.5 hours oratory. Is a musical masterpiece of complexity, just because to remain in the German artistic word. Bach's Passion is really complex and very long. It's really an amazing piece of music. Now, one of the most famous image that to open the story of the Passion, and the Easter story is, of course, the Last Supper. And the Last Supper was actually the Jewish Easter dinner that was celebrated probably the Tuesday or the Wednesday of the week, but according to the Christian tradition, the Last Supper takes place on the Thursday, because that's the way the Holy Week has been made. But of course, this was the way that the Jews celebrated the end of the exile in the desert, in the search of the promised land, and then that's where the lamb is sacrificed, and then if it ends up with a large feast, as most religious celebration in the world, in most cultures, usually end with the consumption of a large amount of food. Now, the most famous Last Supper is definitely the Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci. Now, on the official website of the Last Supper, there is a wonderful gigapixel image that it's available for free to everyone to explore. And we can actually see the details of this incredible masterpiece by Leonardo da Vinci, which was made at the end of 1400s in the refectory of the convent of Santa Maria delle Grazie in Milan. Now, Leonardo didn't use the fresco technique. The fresco technique is a technique when you use a tempera color on a wet plaster. Now, the color and the plaster, as the plaster dry, they create a reaction called carbonation, for which they bond together and they become one thing. So the plaster and the fresco, the color, are basically the same thing. But this requires the painting to be made in a fairly quick way. If you take it too long, it dries too early, and then the color doesn't stay, the carbonation doesn't appear, and doesn't happen. And Leonardo da Vinci didn't like the fact that he had to be too fast. He was very slow in the way in his creative process. So he liked to create every single detail to perfection. That's why we love him so much, but that's also why we have so few paintings by Leonardo. Anyway, he did a dry paint, a paint on a dry wall. So the color started to fade and have a number of problems very soon. In fact, it was repainted many times, and then the room in which the fresco is was bombed during World War II, which didn't help. So it went under a very long restoration process. In fact, if you zoom, you can see that the actual color that was given by Leonardo, it's very, very faint, and there's only little parts of pigment. Most of it is completely missing. And what we see today is just a ghost of what must have been the original one with much deeper color. Even in this state of poor preservation, it's an incredible masterpiece. Leonardo divided the 12 disciples into 4 groups of 3, and he put together on the right of Christ here, Saint John, the young disciples, quite with quite a feminine look. And then in the center, this is Peter with a knife, because later on he would, during the capture of Christ, Peter attacked one of the servants of the Temple of Jerusalem, and he cut a ear off this man. And Christ stopped him and put the ear back and healed this man, saying, we don't do violence, we don't do this, we help people, we don't attack. And then Judas here, you see, with this quite an exotic beard and a darker tone of skin, all these looks, it's it's there to basically make him stand out compared to the others. And then he's got the elbow on a table right in the center, which is the only one who does so. And also he has the coin, he's got the bag of the 30 coins here with which he was paid, of course. This is the moment where Christ said, one of you has already betrayed me, and then my fate will be to be happening soon. And so the disciples react to this, and some of them don't believe, and Leonardo was able to create, using the gestures, the hands, and the expression, all the different reactions that the disciples had to this terrible news. But Christ is isolated, the figure of Christ is isolated. He has this kind of triangular shape, which is a reference to the Trinity, and then also has one hand open like this, like, and like to basically to receive, and another one there, as if, open down there. The table, it's also very detailed. It's a realistic table. There's all sorts of, that's the dishes. You could see the bread. You could see the wine, of course, with a reference to the Eucharist. And then you could see other disciples here. You could see Thomas here, the one with the finger. Later on, after resurrection, Thomas didn't believe that Christ was actually resurrected, so he asked to put the finger in the wound. And then there's other group of disciples here. You can see the hands, the gestures. They have actually, you can see that they're talking, they're trying to understand, they don't know what to do. And the psychological depth of this painting is incredible. Also, one of the things that I love is, like, you could see the folds of ironing on the tablecloth, and the part of decoration of the tablecloth, which is gone. Even here, the knot to keep the tablecloth straight at the corner, which is, I think, is incredible. There's also the feet that you could see underneath. But about at some point in the 17th century, someone had the idea to knock a door through the refectory to have direct access to the rest of the convent instead of having to go out to the cloister. And so the Jesus Christ feet disappeared. They were just knocked down, which I think is a shame. But we do have, although this is not, very well preserved, we have some of the original drawings and sketches that Leonardo did in this very long and complex process of creating this masterpiece. Leonardo took a lot longer than the fathers expected. In fact, they actually at some point started to pressurize Leonardo to finish this, because they had to eat in the cold outside, and they wanted their dining room ready. We have a number of copies made in the 1500s, because this painting became very, very famous as soon as it was uncovered. So it became really, it became so popular that when at the beginning of 1500s, the French took Milan and the Duchy of Milan, basically they invaded northern Italy. The King of France wanted to detach it from the wall and take it to France, but of course he was talked out of the idea, because that could damage and destroy the painting forever. So we're glad that he listened to whatever was suggested, that it stay there. And you can see how the colors would have been a lot brighter. This tapestries on the walls with flowers, and then here as well the feet of Jesus Christ right in the center. Now, right before sitting and having this meal and having this, sort of news that the fate of Christ was about to be happening. Christ was about to meet his fate, and the betrayal and all that. Christ started to wash the feet of his disciples. Now, in the Jewish Easter, what was happening there? It's people would wash their hands, and there was like cleaning before having the meal. But washing the feet was something that usually the servants would have done and slaves would have done. And in this case, the message is very strong that Jesus wanted to say, I'm here to serve you. I'm not coming here to rule or to, it's not about, the obedience, but it's about being there for you. And Giotto, which is this great Florentine artist that worked at the end of the 1200s, beginning of 1300s, and by Vasari and others, historians is considered the very first modern artist, the artist that started to put feelings and perspectives and to create a human-made environment in art, right? As opposite to the Byzantine art, which is all about a kind of a divine, a God-made world. Giotto created a man-made world in which this history happened. And you could see how intimate is this scene where all the disciples are all sitting around, all looking at Christ. Christ is on his knees, holding one foot, and with the hand towards Peter, is just explaining what he's doing. And it looks like a very intimate and familiar scene, which I really like the way he represents this moment in which Christ is humbling himself to his disciples. After the dinner, the supper, they go out in the garden to for praying. The disciples, who probably had too much food, as always the case in these occasions, fell asleep. And then that's the moment where Christ is having this moment of despair a little bit, because of course of the upcoming passion. That's where they're about to come for him. In the background you can see. Now this I've selected these two paintings, which are as well in the National Gallery in London. And the first one is by Andrea Mantegna, this painter of the second half of 1400s, in which the entire environment is very harsh and dry, looks like a canyon. There's almost no vegetation, and then the tree on the right is almost bare. And all this hardship of the environment reflects the hardship of the situation, the hardship of the feeling of Christ in that moment. In the background, there is the city of Jerusalem, which looks something between a Middle-aged Italian city and a Roman city, you can see the Colosseum at the center. It's this idea that Mantegna had, this trying to recreate this sort of idealized antiquity that he had. Now, Mantegna married the sister of another painter called Bellini, Giovanni Bellini from Venice, and Bellini actually used and was inspired, let's say, copied his brother-in-law work by creating this amazing other painting, which is a wonderful light, but there is the same idea of very hard and harsh environment. The hardness and the cracks in the stone represents, the harsh of the feelings and the difficult moments. The perspective of the disciples asleep is very beautiful, and then the city in the background and the group of the captors coming from Christ. Look at the fancy on the right, all this dry, and the dry tree here on the left as well. They all represent the hardship of the moment. And then is the moment where Christ is arrested. This beautiful mosaic, it's a 12th century mosaic, 13th century mosaics, which comes from the Sicilian Cathedral of Monreale near Palermo. It's a wonderful church which is decorated with these beautiful mosaics made during the Norman rule of Sicily and during the Norman kingdom. And you can see how the crowds are all around, the disciples are around Christ and the soldiers around them, and Judas trying to kiss Jesus, and while he's just get arrested. In the left corner, we have Peter cutting the ear off that man, and then a guard on the right holding the wrist of Christ. So it's a very dynamic moment, but still it's pretty flat scene. There's a gilded background. The figures are just like glued on top of each other. There's not really depth of perspective. It's an illustration, but it's not right. I would say it, and it's beautiful, but there isn't that kind of depth and atmosphere that we saw, for example, in Giotto, that was I was talking before. The most famous capture of Christ, and probably one of the most beautiful, it's this great masterpiece by Caravaggio. And this was unknown until a few years ago, when in the 1990s it was discovered in a Jesuit house in Dublin. And this was made for a noble family for the family Caetani in Rome, and the Caetani sold it to a Scottish collector in the 18th century, and later on it was sold to a merchant and was sold to an Irish woman, which gifted it to the Jesuit fathers in Dublin. And today this is on display in the National Gallery of Ireland. It represents the moment where Christ is arrested, and at the same time there is the kiss of Judas. So it's not very different from the one we saw made about 400 years before. And the great thing about this one is that Caravaggio probably put himself here, so he represents himself as a witness. He wants to represent this moment as something which he truly believed had been an historical fact. And then you have here the reflection of the lights on the armors of the soldiers the hands of Christ, which show the torment and the pain, about the suffering that he's facing. And then we have a person here in the back screaming with the hands up, asking for help. So this is very dramatic. Caravaggio is painted between the end of 1500 and the beginning of 1600, and there is this moment of the beginning of Baroque art in which theatralization, dramatization, representation of feelings in a very, dramatic way became very important. But Caravaggio used also a concept which was part of the way the Catholic rite of the week of the Passion were, of this contrast between the darkness and the light. The figures are all in the darkness, and there's this light coming from the top that basically gets us some glimpse. You cannot see the eyes of the guards arresting Christ. You could see Judas, but Judas is mostly in the dark, and just as approaches to Christ, you could see the light on the face of Christ, on the hands of Christ, and on the face of the witness. So the use of light is a theological use. And after his arrest, Christ is tortured, and it's brought first in front of brought to the synagogue, and then is brought in front of Pontius Pilate, and of course the Romans didn't want to kill him, and then there's the episode when they asked if they want Christ or Barabbas. The most of the artworks about this moment in the Passion are about the torments, and it's about the whipping of Christ, the sufferings, and that also became a way of for people to meditate and for praying, especially in convents. One of the most beautiful whipping of Christ is this one by Piero della Francesca in the middle of the 1400s. Piero della Francesca was this great master who created this idea of creating a geometrical and mathematical proportion and perspective. It also published studies about the art of using perspective in art, and you could see that the placing of the figures, it's following some very precise lines. So if we create two diagonals here, we have a box, a square. If we cut the square and then we got the placing of the figures, we understand why the figures are placing here. There are other geometrical figures that can be created, and you could see that everything is placed according to a very precise geometrical and mathematical proportion. And the most important scene is actually in the background. Christ tied to a column, being whipped, is actually in the background. On the foreground, we have these three figures that are probably a celebration of the family of the Dukes of Urbino of the time, which is where the paintings were actually made for, or probably on the more philosophical aspects, they could represent the three ages of mankind. So a young man for youth, and then a more mature man, and then an elderly man. But the one is not necessarily opposite to the other. It could be actually both, and it could be the portrait for example of Antonio della Rovere, which was at that time the Duke of Urbino, who died in his 20s. He was assassinated. So this could well be a portrait of this man who suffered a lot of a brutal death. They broke into the palace and they murdered him brutally, and his body was brutalized. So it could have been also a piece that could have been painted to commemorate this episodes. We don't have enough information about that, but I just wanted to show you the beauty and the complexity of the environment with the architecture and the perspective of the back. It's really, and it's also a way that the Passion of Christ is actually brought into our world, and rather than try to create a more mythical setting. Another famous whipping of Christ is the one by Caravaggio, which is kept in Naples in the Museum of Capodimonte, but it was originally made for the Church of San Domenico. It was made during the first day of Caravaggio in Naples at the beginning of the 1600s. And you can see here again, you can barely see the faces and the expression of the captors of Christ, but you can actually see very well the body of Christ, which is offered to us, and the column in the center. And as well here, there is this very precise geometrical composition with Christ in the center. And then you can see the figures here, and you can see all the lines are very, 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 very precise. So the way that the figures are placed in the space, and the use of light, the contrast of the darkness and the light. Of course, those who are torturing Christ, they have no idea what they're doing. They are in the dark, and then Christ is here to take us in the light. But this representation of the Passion of Christ, of course, had a very long history, and also, as I mentioned before, the use during the praying and the meditation. There was a word for it, imitatio Christi, the way that a good Christian should actually live a life in the image of Christ, by also somehow sharing the same sufferings. And so that started another line of inflicting self-harm and tortures and other sufferings in order to share the burden of Christ. And there's a very beautiful place in Florence. It's called the Convent of San Marco, that has the rooms of the Dominican fathers who lived there. And in the 1400s, one of these fathers, called Fra Angelico, painted the rooms, a fresco in every single room of this convent, that was used as an image to pray and meditate and about mostly about the Passion of the Christ. So there's a number of crucifixions and another number of frescoes with episodes of the Passion or images of saints. This is the Humiliation of Christ, in which the fresco doesn't have the usual kind of narrative or setting. This is more symbolic, it's more allegorical. And I find it is very interesting. It's very unique. You have, Christ being slapped, but you only see the hands, the crown of thorns put with the canes, and it's been spitting on. And there's the Virgin Mary and a Dominican saint on the right. So basically, that's the two figures accompanying him. And Christ is blindfolded and dressed with his very long white gown. And the painting looks more, this is a fresco actually, looks more like a tarot card than an actual, fresco. That's because its function was the same as the tarot card, was a symbol in order to stimulate reflection and thinking and meditation. And there are several like this, which I think they're very, very beautiful. This is the actual picture of the room. The rooms are very small. Today it's a museum, so they're open to visit. If you are in Florence or plan to go in Florence, I think it's one of the most beautiful places to see, because you can also understand the Convent of San Marco was one of the early centers of Renaissance in Florence. It was sponsored and rebuilt by Michelangelo with the money of the Medici, and it's a very important place for the Florentine culture and Renaissance. But the way it is kept today, it's amazing, because there are all these beautiful cellars and the frescoes by Fra Angelico. Of course, Caravaggio as well did another beautiful version of the Torment of Christ, is the Crowning of the Thorns. And then you could see the soldiers with the 17th century armor. It's a way to tell the people that this is not just something that happened a long time ago. It's something that matters here today for us. And so that's this dialogue. And again, we can barely see the faces, or we don't see the eyes of the capture of Christ, because they're in the dark, and we see the body of Christ, the mouth half open, it's looking down on the floor. It's very, very dramatic. It's very, 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 very beautiful. In the same convent of St. Mark, there is, of course, a number of crucifixions. And now I've prepared a selection of crucifixions. There are, of course, tens of thousands to choose. It's very difficult. I made the selection that I hope you enjoy. This is in the same convent of St. Mark in in Florence, same one where we saw the cellars. This is in the ground floor, so it's quite a large room that has this crucifixion, then with a number of saints. There's of course Virgin Mary and a few other figures, but there's a large number of saints, mostly of course Dominican saints, but not only. There's also Franciscan saints and so on. Every order had their own saints, and I just I don't know if you saw it, watched it last night, that after 2 years of interrupting, the Pope had done the large celebration of the Via Crucis, the Stations of the Cross, which take place the Friday night. And every Italian city, every Italian town has a procession or the Station of the Cross on the Friday night. In Rome, there are several locally, but the large one is at the Colosseum with tens of thousands of people and the Pope there. And that it's usually broadcast globally live. And the tradition of making the Station of the Cross in the Colosseum started in the Middle Ages, but was only started from the 17th century, that basically became then a permanent thing. And it was so permanent that then the Colosseum, before the excavation uncovered the arena center and all the underground parts, had the Stations of the Cross with these little shrines all around and the cross in the center, and they were doing this ceremonies. There was even a little church that was built there. Now there's still a chapel inside the Colosseum, and they still say Mass every Sunday. And this is a picture from a few years ago, but they still use the same metal cross with the burning torches. And this is just one of a series of rituals. Now, I think most Catholics do just do the Good Friday procession and a Sunday Mass. But actually, there's a service every evening, every night. And from the Thursday night, the Friday night, the Saturday night, and then that's the last one on the Sunday. And this is called in the Catholic tradition the tenebrae. Tenebrae is like the darkness, and it was basically a number of readings or praying about the lamentation of the Christ. So it started on Friday night, and then with the Via Crucis, and then goes on Saturday night, and ends up actually starts on Thursday night, and then ends up on the Sunday. And in the Middle Ages and in Renaissance, a number of musical pieces were composed for this. One of the most beautiful was made at the beginning of 1600s by this Neapolitan musicians called Carlo Gesualdo. Gesualdo was a very, very wealthy noble. He was one of the largest landowner in southern Italy at the time where Naples was part of the Kingdom of Spain. And he was married to a beautiful woman, which was also unfaithful. And everybody in the Kingdom of Naples knew that his wife was cheating on him. But at some point, he decided to stop it. So he murdered his wife with the lover in their bed. So he just went home and, he just caught them in the bed together and just stabbed them to death. Probably didn't kill them himself. He had the servants, or he had somebody, he had this arranged for a long time. And after that, he went on exile. And nobles could, it was considered a kind of a good reason for killing his wife. And so he was never under trial, was never arrested, but he was exiled for about 15 years. Later on, he remarried. He had the children. But his grandson died, and later on his son died, and then eventually he left himself dying. So he had a very dramatic way and of a very dramatic life. And because he was very wealthy, he became a musician for passion, and he was relatively free of doing whatever music he wanted. So his music is very, very unique, and it's almost bizarre in the way it's very dissonant. He has a lot of noises rather than mute. It's a music that has a lot of noise in it as well. And it's very modern in this sense. I just play a minute from this composition called Tenebrae, which is actually this the music composed for these ceremonies of the Holy Week, the nocturnal ceremonies, in which basically there was a candelabra with 15 candles, and there was a praying being said or sung, and then a candle would be turned off, and then all the 15 of them would be turned off. It's basically the dying of the light, but the light has to go off first to be able to have a new light. So it's the same allegory of the resurrection of the Christ. There must be suffering and death and humiliation before there could be resurrection and then magnificence. And I'll just play this one. There's a few words that this man said. I think this musicians is a Swedish, or they are from Northern Europe. So they made this recording to you. So.
Oh, how do you say that in Italian? Ovos, ovos.
Sorry, I'm just.
Oh, how do you say that in Italian? Ovos, ovos. This O, is it O or O? How do you say O? It's not O, it's O. O.
Bravo, it's O, it's not O. Just wanted to lower the volume. Yeah, so Gesualdo is a wonderful musician, and sometimes it's quite depressing because, of course, he tried to atone all his life for his murder, and the murdering of the wife actually haunted his life. And when his son died, he kind of believed that was his retribution for his sins. So it's really a dark figure of the late 1500s, early 1600s. So it's very, very interesting. Carlo Gesualdo is his name, and it's one of the most important authors of madrigali in Baroque music. Again, Giotto, the crucifixion, of course, is the center moment of the Passion. In the Middle Ages, there was usually this scene when you have the soldiers, the guards, that the angel crying, opening their chest and beating their chest, collecting the blood of Christ in these cups. You could see the detail, and then of course Virgin Mary on the left, having a fit, and the Mary Magdalene with long curly hair, and on the right the soldiers completely uninterested in Christ. They're trying to, get the clothes of Christ off him. So basically that's the interest just in material things, while during the death of Christ, and it's the same resurrection we saw. And of course the crucifixion sometimes is represented by itself with saints in order to use as something as a support for praying. Like in this case, this comes from another of the rooms of the fathers. You can see the blood here is bleeding on the wood of the cross, and then Saint Dominicus here, the founder of the Dominican fathers, meditating on the death of Christ. One of the most beautiful crucifixion ever painted in the early Renaissance was this one. Is the Mond crucifixion by Raphael. It's beautiful, the perfection of it. You see the angels almost dancing around Christ, collecting the blood that spills from the wounds of Christ as a fountain, as this celebration of the blood of Christ as an instrument of salvation. And then the saints and the Virgin Mary in contemplation, serene contemplation. Here there's no drama. It's just about things are happening because this was written, and then there's the moon and the sun and the sky. So it's just, this is part of the natural order of things, and we should just contemplate this moment because it's the moment of our salvation. As things changed in Italian history in the 1500s, the representation of the Passion and the Crucifixion became more and more dramatic. This is Luca Signorelli. This painting is in the Uffizi today, and you could see the very statuary position of the Mary Magdalene on the cross. And then we have the skull with the lizard. The lizard, every crawler, lizard, snake in the Old Testament and also in the Christian allegories symbolize the sin. So this is the death of the sin, because with this sacrifice, Christ has basically repaid for the original sin, the Adam sin. From Luca Signorelli, another Renaissance masterpiece was the there was also a number of sculptured crucifixions which were made in Florence. One of the most famous is this one by Donatello. And Donatello created this crucifixion and asked to his friend Brunelleschi what he thought about that. And Brunelleschi said, "Oh, you've crucified a peasant," and so which was taken as an insult. But actually, Donatello thought that that's right. I wanted to represent a real person crucified there, and so it's very impressive the way this was represented. The one on the left is the one by Brunelleschi, so you can see by comparison the difference of the two. The one of Brunelleschi, it's equally beautiful, but it's much more idealized than the one on the right, which looks like a real person just hung there with real physical proportions of a realistic person. And one of the most also recognizable and peculiar artists of the 1500s was the Greek painter called Domenico Theotokopoulos, originally from Crete. He was educated first in Greece and then in Venice, and he has a lot of Venetian to him. On the left, you could see Christ being arrested and stripped of his clothes to be prepared for the crucifixion. And you can see a Spaniard, someone with the large shining uniform there, similar to what we saw in Caravaggio. This was painted just a few decades before Caravaggio. Domenico Theotokopoulos is known as El Greco because then he went to work in Spain. And on the right, this incredible crucifixion with this very, vibrant representation. We have the same elements that we saw before, but in complete different light and way. It was very vibrant representation. And in this sense, is very similar to an artist which was very close to him, Tintoretto, who was a Venetian as well. And basically, we have here tens of figures, and that we have a whole story on top of the crucifixion, which is in the center. This is a very large canvas. It's about 6 meters wide, which is about nearly 20 feet wide, and it's in the Scuola di San Rocco in Venice, which is a very beautiful, very well preserved series of almost 60 paintings by Tintoretto. And you can see the different figures, soldiers, people, preparing, lifting up another one of the men crucified together with Christ, and Christ in the center with this glare, which of course is the center of the story, the Virgin Mary down here. And later on, at the beginning of 1600, another painter created yet another version in which, again, light and darkness are, in the contrast, like in the Caravaggio. This is Guido Reni, this beautiful Christ. This is one of the most beautiful crucifixions ever, I think, and because it's so simple, but it's very, at the same time, it's so powerful and has this beautiful contrast between the darkness of the environment and the light of the Christ on the cross. It's also very elegant. Guido Reni painted that in the Church of San Lorenzo in Lucina in Rome. It's a church not far from the Spanish Steps. It's in the detail of the Christ. It's very, very beautiful. Now, just a bit more music with Haydn, the last 7 words of Christ on the cross. Like, just to mention, Haydn, of course, is the 18th century. The order about the last 7 words of Christ on the cross. Christ is then taken down from the cross, and there is the lamentation. So the Virgin Mary and the disciples and the Mary Magdalene and the others are all crying for Christ. This Giotto again, you can see the angels, or crying and all doing this kind of rounds in the sky by showing their suffering, which is, I think, it's very, very interesting. And of course the faces and the figures, they're all dramatic and with the hands up and so on. One of the most beautiful representation of both the lamentation of the Christ and then the crucifixion are by this artist called Antonello da Messina. You can see the crucifixion has this beautiful idea of Christ on the cross as a symbol of faith, and then the other 2 figures there that shows the contrast between the sacrifice and just people being executed because they were criminals, especially this one here on the right, of which we have the detail. And of course, there are skulls and other symbols and the Virgin Mary. While the one on the left, which I have the detail here, it's just these, the Christ is a sort of Pietà of Christ, but without the Virgin Mary, just with the little cherub, the angels crying. The suffering of the angels is an element of that really, was used a lot in the 12, 13, 1400s, and later on kind of faded out. And another incredible lamentation of Christ is the one by Andrea Mantegna, which is very steep presentation. Both Antonello da Messina and Mantegna work in the middle of 1400s, while later on also statues were made. This is the most famous of these sets of the Lamentation of the Christ, is in Bologna by the artist called Niccolò dell'Arca, with the figures running, screaming. You can almost hear them crying loud, and it's very dramatic representation of the Lamentation. And a beautiful musical piece about that, it's the Stabat Mater, which it's a poetry by a Tuscany artist called Jacopone da Todi, a middle-aged poet. And Jacopone was also a friar. He actually entered the convent after his wife died in a collapse of a building, and he wrote around the 1200s. And later on in 1700, this Napoleon musician called Giovanni Battista Pergolesi wrote this beautiful musical piece about the Stabat Mater, about the suffering of the Virgin Mary in the contemplation of the death, of the body of Jesus Christ, of the corpse of Christ. course, is all in Latin. It's very, very beautiful. Stava Mater means mother stood. And this idea that there must have been a point after, between the moment where Jesus Christ is taken down from the cross and then is taken for the burial, there must have been a moment when, Christ was held one last time by his mother. And this is something that is not in the gospel. It's not mentioned in the gospel. It must have been something that came up some point towards the Middle Ages or the beginning of the Renaissance. Anyway, the first representation of the Pietà, of the Lamentation of the Virgin Mary only with the body of Christ, they are these little statues in Germany called Vesperbild. And this was something that started in Northern Europe and eventually found its way down to Italy. It wasn't something that Italians did normally. And in fact, the most famous Pietà, which is the Pietà by Michelangelo, which is in the Basilica of St. Peter, which was made in 1499 by a 24-year-old Michelangelo, was 1498-99, was commissioned by a French cardinal, the Cardinal Billiet de Langrelot, for one of the chapels of the Basilica of St. Peter, and has this kind of northern tradition down to Rome. And Michelangelo represented the Virgin Mary with this beautiful, very young face. It's the idealization of the Virgin Mary, holding the body of Christ. Now, we all see the statue, which is quite high behind the glass today in the Basilica of St. Peter, and just frontally, I just want to show you from above. And you see that the body of Christ is completely wrapped around the body of the Virgin Mary. She's just there around her. And this is very intimate scene, this idea of the motherhood, that he actually was the fruit of her womb. And I think it's very, very sweet. And Michelangelo even finished the part behind, so you can actually see also behind the hair and the other part. He even signed, there's his name on the belt of the Virgin Mary. And one more thing, you could see that similar to the figure of Christ in the Last Supper by Da Vinci, you see that the statue has a triangular shape, so again a reference to the Trinity, and also has these very large legs which are hidden by all this clothing, all this basically folds that basically cover the giant legs of the Virgin Mary. Is realistically is not proportionate, because the body of Christ should be bigger than the Virgin Mary, but in this case it all works perfectly because of the composition. And Raphael created a new element to the story of the Passion by inventing this transportation of the body of Christ, what Christ would have been represented during the transportation to the tomb. The Virgin Mary actually, kind of abandoned completely in the hands of the other girls, and then the Mary Magdalene next to Christ, and you can see the physical. You can actually feel the weight of the body of Christ to the arms of these figures actually have transporting him. The idea was came from the study of the ancient Roman bas-reliefs that had the transportation of the body of Meleagros, and so Raphael adapted a Greek and Roman theme to the Christian story, creating a very successful painting. It was so successful that in the 1600s, the Cardinal Borghese wanted to steal the painting from the church for which it was done. It was done for the Church of St. Francis in Perugia, for the chapel of the Baglioni family. And Atalanta Baglioni was the mother of Grifonetto Baglioni, which was murdered in his 20s. And so that was the reason why they asked Raphael to create the painting about the lamentation in the body of Christ, or the transportation of Christ, because it would have given the idea of the suffering of the mother for the loss of the child. About 100 years later, another great master, Caravaggio, actually kind of reutilized a similar position, similar idea. You could see the arm down and the body of Christ is basically in a very similar way. Even the white cloth is all there, but in a very realistic way. The wrinkles on the face of the figures, and again the contrast between the darkest and the light, the hands up, and the very very vivid representation of the burial of the Christ. In this case, rather than transportation, has been lowered down in the earth, and also this kind of a vertical piece. It's very interesting. This as well is in the Vatican museums, because it was in the church in Rome. It was taken to Paris for the Louvre by the French during the Napoleonic period, and then it returned after 1815 to be, showed publicly in a museum. And it's another great idea. And I think that you could see that across the centuries, some ideas and solutions that artists created, then they are reused and reinvent and readjusted by younger generations. In the 1700s in Naples, in the Cappella San Severo, an incredible, and I have it here somewhere, yes, an incredible chapel was created by Raimondo di Sangro. It's called Cappella San Severo. It's in the center of Naples, with a number of allegorical statues that symbolize the journey of the soul from the darkness and the ignorance and sin to liberation through knowledge and religion. So it's a much more complex than this, but that's just I would summarize it. In the center today, there is the Veiled Christ, which is an incredible statue made by an artist called San Martino. And you can see it's Christ wrapped in a shroud, and through the shroud you can actually see the entire body. You can even see the holes of the nails on his hands. And this was not originally meant to be in the church, but in the crypt in the church, in the dark underground. So it should have given you an effect as if you were really seeing a real body in a shroud. And it's really, really beautiful and incredible. It's probably one of the most beautiful things you could see in Italy. Even Antonio Canova, the great artist, the great sculptor, which was the greatest sculptor of its time in the world at the beginning of the 1800s, he said, when he saw this statue, I would give 10 years of my life to be able to sculpture something this beautiful. And of course, very, very dramatic as well, because they are then the nails, the crown of thorns, also the tools of the passion. Now, between the death and the resurrection, Christ went to the limbo, to the big entrance of hell, where they are those who died before the resurrection of Christ. And so even if they were good, they couldn't go to heavens. And so, because they didn't have the sacraments. So Christ went there to liberate them. And this is something that's been represented since the very beginning of Christianity. It is an early Middle Age fresco, which is in Rome, in the Church of San Clemente, in the famous underground church, not far from the Colosseum. And you can see Christ stepping on a devil, giving the hand to the people in the limbo. Later on, it became, again, a very important topic for the Renaissance art. This is Andrea Mantegna, the Lombard artist that we saw before, going down in this sort of cave, because that's how they figure out was the entrance of hell. Just the early step down, just before the gates of hell, sort of this antechamber of hell. Christ, in this case, we could see his back just going there to lift them up. And also Dürer represented it in a very, very similar way. Now, Mantegna, this one is again a late 15th century, mid late 15th century. This is the beginning of 1500s, where you can see also the devils there trying to stop Christ, because of course that's their job, that's what they do. And finally, the resurrection on the Sunday. This is one of the last images I'm going to show you tonight. Again, Piero della Francesca, with this beautiful Christ rising from the dead while the gods are asleep. And here we have a beautiful blue background, the trees, and then you see the line of trees on the right, like you can see today in Tuscany or in central Italy. And then it's very physical. It's not a resurrection in which he just flies up at the tomb, or, it's not a ghost or something evanescent. No, it's actually very physical. It's very statuary. He holds the flag with the cross, and then he just has the foot on the marble frame of the tomb. So it's just coming out. You can feel the weight of somebody coming out on the step. So I really like it because it's very physical. It represents the reality of that. And a complete different perspective was the one that drove the Italian artist, the Venetian artist Sebastiano Ricci. And this chapel, it's in London, it's the Chelsea Hospital, which was I think it was a retirement house for veterans. And this was fresco at the beginning of the 1700s by this Venetian artist who worked in Rome and of course in parts of Italy, and then he worked in Paris and in London for a long time in the 18th century. 18th century in Italy there were great schools and great masters and a lot of artists, very talented artists, but there wasn't enough money there from the Italian nobility, which was kind of fading, for them to work. So they emigrated. They went all over from England to, some went to Russia and other parts to work, whenever there was this possibility. And the image that I had used also for this presentation of the talk, it's not the actual fresco in the dome, which is beautiful, it's quite large. It was actually, the fresco was actually made by the son, but Marco Ricci, I think it was called. But Sebastiano Ricci made two versions, small version of this scene. And this one is in Dulwich Gallery in London as well. It's a small painting, it's probably 2 feet wide, it's about 60 centimeters wide. And it's actually in the Dulwich Gallery, it's not even very, in a very nice location. It's quite high, you can't really see it very much. But it's beautiful because there's this Christ just popping out, and you know, with the angels around, with the clouds, with people running, the Roman soldiers running, they're scared, and the empty tomb there with the angels around. And this style is called Cortonesme because it's this idea of movement and flying around was used for the first time by Pietro da Cortona, this painter. He worked very often with Bernini, and he made the ceiling of Palazzo Barberini was the very first of this genre, which became very, very popular in the 17th and 18th century. And so with this triumphal Christ arriving, you know, in a kind of a superhero kind of way, you know, with the showing the holes on the hands of the nails, and then with this beautiful long flag, which is not a small flag as we saw before, but it's just a large standard. We have this triumphal Christ. I wish you a happy Easter. I don't know if you have any questions. You can unmute yourself if you want. I have unlocked the microphones, and I will, let me just see. I will be doing next week a visual tour about Mantua, which is this beautiful city in Lombardy, in northern Italy, next to Veneto, and that has this beautiful palace made by Giulio Romano, one of the people of Raphael, and there's a number of beautiful frescoes and things to see, like the chamber of the painted by Andrea Mantegna. And the week after, May the 1st, we're going to Tivoli for the Villa d'Este Garden. It's the beautiful villa made in the 16th century with these beautiful fountains and gardens. Now, before we finish, I would like to play. Thank you, John. Thank you, everybody. I wish you a lovely Easter or lovely holiday, and then I will see you shortly. And so thank you for joining me tonight. I will play now from Cavalleria Rusticana. Is this opera written in the 19th century by Pietro Mascagni, based on a story written by an Italian writer called Giovanni Verga, which was a real, they call verismo in Italian, the realistic realism in literature. Actually, they were telling the stories of real people, poor people. In this case, there's a story where it's during the Easter Sunday, there's a man who, you know, is basically having an affair with a woman which is married to someone else, and eventually, when the husband finds out, they go for a duel and he's killed. And this is the celebration right before the duel, where there's the big procession for the for the Easter Sunday. Shoulder burn procession, which is still done in Italy with on the Easter time, and you can see also the procession in the opera setting. On the Good Friday as well, the Stations of the Cross, sometimes they're much more scenographic. And I remember years ago in Assisi with people with hoods and chains. It was quite spooky, actually. It was very good to see, but it was, if you didn't know what was going on, you might have thought you ended up, I don't know, it would look like some voodoo kind of thing. It was very, very strange because people were wearing real chains and having these large crosses and the hoods on, so with torches and fires. So thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Let's see. Ciao, Joanna. Hello. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. It went a little bit long. Thank you. Thank you, Martha. Hello, Mike. And we'll see. Thank you. Thank you very much. The only thing is that I will send you then the names of the music pieces, because during this presentation, there's no time to listen to the entire music piece because some of them are like an hour long. So, but just like the little breakout. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. And then we finish with Cavalleria Rusticana. They're singing that the Lord has risen, that I resort to the Lord has risen. Ok, buonanotte, good night, thank you everybody. Buona Pasqua. Ciao, buonanotte.